The rain hammered against the pavement outside St. Mary's General Hospital, creating rivulets of water that carried leaves, dirt, and forgotten remnants of the day down the streets. It was the kind of storm that made everyone grateful to be indoors. But not everyone had that luxury. A hunched figure emerged from the darkness, illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning. The man shuffled toward the brightly lit entrance, his tattered coat clinging to his thin frame. His shoes, barely held together with duct tape, squelched with each step. His face, partially hidden by an old knit cap, revealed eyes that darted around nervously. He hesitated at the automatic doors, as if unsure whether to enter or retreat back into the shadows. Inside, the ER buzzed with activity. Patients sat on hard plastic chairs, some clutching tissues to their faces, others cradling injuries. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, their voices blending into a cacophony of urgency. Among them was Nurse Lily Hart, a woman in her early 30s with an air of quiet determination. Her kind eyes scanned the room, quickly assessing who needed help the most. The man stepped inside, his presence immediately drawing attention. Conversations hushed as patients and staff turned to look at him. A security guard near the door straightened, ready to intervene. Lily noticed the man too, her instincts kicking in. She approached him, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, are you here for treatment?" she asked, her gaze lingering on the deep lines etched into his face. Up close, he smelled of rain-soaked streets and despair. "I just need to sit for a while," the man mumbled, his voice hoarse. He avoided her eyes, instead looking at the floor as if it might open up and swallow him whole. Lily hesitated. Protocol was clear. The hospital couldn't allow loitering. But there was something in the man's demeanor that made her pause. He didn't seem drunk or aggressive, just lost. "All right," she said softly. "You can sit over there." She gestured to an empty chair in the corner of the waiting area. "But if you need medical attention, you'll have to check in." The man nodded, shuffling toward the chair. As he sat down, the security guard approached Lily. "Should I ask him to leave?" the guard asked, his tone low but insistent. Lily shook her head. "He's not causing any trouble. Let him be for now." The guard frowned but didn't argue. He cast one last glance at the man before returning to his post. As the minutes ticked by, the man watched the hospital's activity with keen interest. His eyes followed the nurses as they moved from patient to patient, their compassion evident even in the midst of the chaos. He observed the doctors, their faces etched with exhaustion but driven by an unwavering sense of purpose. And he noticed the patients, some grateful, others frustrated, all clinging to hope. A young mother cradling a coughing toddler caught his attention. Her desperation was palpable as she pleaded with the receptionist to expedite their turn. The man's hand twitched, as if he wanted to intervene but stopped himself. Instead, he adjusted his cap and sank deeper into his chair, becoming one with the shadows. "Sir," a voice startled him. It was Lily again, holding a cup of hot coffee. She offered it to him with a small smile. "You look like you could use this." He hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the cup. "Thank you," he murmured. Lily nodded, her curiosity piqued. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The man hesitated for a long moment before replying, "It's Ernie." "Well, Ernie," Lily said, "if you need anything, just let me know." He nodded, clutching the cup as if it were a lifeline. Lily lingered for a moment, sensing there was more to this man than met the eye, but she was called away by another nurse. Left alone, Ernie glanced around again. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up, mirroring the storm within him. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This was exactly what he had come to see. The raw humanity, the cracks in the system, the people slipping through those cracks. As the night wore on, Ernie silently vowed to stay as long as it took to uncover the truth about this hospital. Little did anyone know, the man they had dismissed as just another homeless drifter was about to turn their world upside down. What would you do if you were in Nurse Lily's position? Would you offer a helping hand or follow protocol? Share your thoughts below. The storm had slowed to a drizzle by morning, but the tension inside St. Mary's General Hospital remained unchanged. Patients continued to trickle in, bringing their aches, pains, and desperation. Ernie, still tucked away in the corner, hadn't moved much throughout the night. His cup of coffee, now empty, rested on the floor by his feet. His eyes, however, were wide awake, darting around the room, observing everything. For most of the staff, the homeless man was just another invisible figure. But to Nurse Lily, he was becoming a puzzle. She had seen countless people come and go through those doors, each carrying their own burdens. Yet there was something about Ernie, his silence, his sharp gaze, that gnawed at her curiosity. "Hey, Lily," called a voice. It was Dr. Alan Peterson, the ER's senior physician. He was in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and an air of constant urgency. "You're not running a charity, you know. Letting him hang around like that sets a bad precedent." Lily frowned, crossing her arms. "He's not bothering anyone, Dr. Peterson." Peterson glanced toward Ernie, who seemed to sense their conversation and quickly averted his eyes. "I'm just saying, hospitals like ours are already stretched thin. We can't afford to be a shelter. And maybe if the world were kinder, people like him wouldn't have to rely on places like this." Lily shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. Peterson raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. Across the room, Elon Musk, disguised as Ernie, was doing more than observing. He was analyzing. His genius mind cataloged every inefficiency, every act of compassion, and every missed opportunity. The hospital was a microcosm of the systemic problems he wanted to understand. His decision to pose as a homeless man hadn't been easy. Weeks ago, sitting in the sterile boardroom of one of his companies, he'd overheard an alarming statistic. Over 500,000 people in the United States were homeless, and many of them lacked access to basic health care. The numbers had hit him harder than he expected. "Data is one thing," he'd told his closest confidant and personal assistant, Max, during a late-night brainstorming session. "But I need to see it, feel it, experience it." Max had protested, of course. "Elon, you're a billionaire. You can't just walk into a hospital and pretend to be homeless. It's dangerous. And frankly, it's insane." But Elon had made up his mind. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a problem solver, a disruptor. And this was a problem that needed solving. Now, sitting in that corner, dressed in rags, Elon reflected on his first night as Ernie. He hadn't expected it to be easy, but the indifference he'd faced was harsher than he imagined. The way people looked at him, or didn't look at him, was a sharp reminder of how society dismissed the most vulnerable. A commotion near the front desk snapped him out of his thoughts. A young woman, holding a toddler, was arguing with the receptionist. "Please," the woman begged, her voice cracking. "My son's fever is getting worse. He's burning up. We've been waiting for hours." The receptionist, clearly overwhelmed, held up a hand. "Ma'am, I understand, but we're short-staffed. You'll have to wait your turn like everyone else." The woman's shoulders sagged, and she sank into a nearby chair, clutching her son tightly. The boy let out a weak cough, his tiny face flushed and sweaty. Elon's chest tightened. He had to do something, but he reminded himself to stay in character. This wasn't the time to reveal his true identity. Instead, he stood up and walked toward the woman, his movements slow and deliberate. "Is he okay?" Elon asked, his voice raspy but soft. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red from crying, but she nodded. He's just sick. I don't know what else to do." Elon crouched down to the boy's level, careful not to get too close. "Do you mind if I look? I've seen a lot of this on the streets." It wasn't a complete lie. He had spent time researching common illnesses among the homeless. The woman hesitated but nodded. Elon placed the back of his hand gently on the boy's forehead. It was burning hot, just as the mother had said. His breathing was shallow, his little body trembling. "You need to get him seen now," Elon said firmly. "This isn't just a fever." The woman's face crumpled. "They won't listen to me," she whispered. Elon glanced at the front desk, where the receptionist was typing furiously, oblivious to the scene. Taking a deep breath, he stood and walked over to Nurse Lily, who was filling out a chart nearby. "Excuse me," he said quietly. Lily looked up, surprised to see him standing so close. "That boy over there needs help. Now." Lily followed his gaze, her expression softening as she saw the mother and child. Without hesitation, she set down her clipboard and walked over to them. Elon watched as she knelt beside the boy, her gentle demeanor instantly putting the mother at ease. "I'll take care of this," Lily assured the woman. She called for a wheelchair and helped the mother lift the boy into it. As they disappeared down the hall, she shot a quick glance back at Elon, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. Elon returned to his corner, his heart pounding. He hadn't done much, but it was enough to make him feel human. For the first time in years, he wasn't the powerful billionaire making decisions from a high-rise office. He was just a man trying to make a difference, one small act at a time. The hospital had settled into its usual rhythm by mid-morning. Doctors rushed between patients, nurses charted vitals, and the sound of beeping monitors filled the air. But even in this chaos, Elon, still disguised as Ernie, noticed patterns. He saw the cracks in the system, the moments where compassion clashed with bureaucracy. And as he sat silently in his corner, he realized he was no longer just an observer. He was now part of the story. Lily returned to the waiting area, her face flushed with both frustration and determination. She spotted Ernie sitting in his usual spot, his eyes fixed on the floor, though she knew he had seen everything. She approached him with a cautious smile. "Thank you for pointing that out," she said, lowering her voice. "The boy, he's stable now, but he has pneumonia. If we'd waited much longer, it could have been bad." Elon nodded, his expression neutral. It wasn't right, leaving them to wait like that. "It's not," Lily agreed, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "But we're overwhelmed. Short on staff, short on supplies. Sometimes, we're forced to choose who to help first. And it's the worst part of this job." Her words struck a chord. Elon had expected inefficiencies, but hearing about them firsthand added weight to the numbers he had read in reports. He wanted to press her for more details, but he knew he couldn't blow his cover just yet. Instead, he leaned back and asked, "So, what keeps you going? Why not walk away?" Lily gave him a sad smile. "Because for every failure, there's a win. Like that boy. He'll get better now. And because someone has to care, even when the system doesn't." Her words lingered in Elon's mind as she walked away to tend to another patient. Across the room, a man in a suit had entered the waiting area. He stood out like a sore thumb, with his pressed blazer and polished shoes. His eyes scanned the room briefly before locking onto Ernie. The man's name was Max, the assistant Elon had left in charge while embarking on this unconventional mission. Max approached cautiously, pretending to look for someone else. When he reached Elon, he sat down a chair away and muttered under his breath, "This is insane. You've been here for 2 days now. Do you realize how much chaos you're causing at Tesla, SpaceX, and everywhere else?" Elon didn't look at him, keeping his voice low. "Everything's fine. You're running things, aren't you?" "Barely," Max hissed. "Elon, this is dangerous. If someone recognizes you—" "No one will," Elon interrupted, finally turning to face him. "And even if they do, it won't matter. I'm here for a reason, Max. There's more to this hospital than what we see on the surface." Max sighed, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. "And what have you found? Besides pneumonia cases and bad coffee?" Elon's eyes darkened. "Neglect, gaps in care, people falling through the cracks because they can't afford to be seen or because the staff doesn't have the resources. This place isn't broken because of the people. It's broken because of the system." Max leaned back, his skepticism softening. He knew Elon's stubbornness well enough to realize there was no talking him out of this. "Fine, but just be careful. If the press gets wind of this, they'll eat you alive." "They won't," Elon replied. "Not until I'm ready." Max nodded reluctantly, standing to leave. "Call me if you need anything. And for the love of God, don't eat any more food from vending machines." Elon chuckled softly as Max walked away, blending back into the flow of people. The day dragged on, and the cracks Elon had noticed earlier became chasms. He overheard a nurse arguing with a pharmacist about missing medication. A janitor complained about broken equipment that hadn't been replaced in years. And more patients arrived, their frustration mounting as the waiting times stretched endlessly. By late afternoon, a young doctor, barely out of residency, collapsed into a chair near Elon. The man ran a hand through his messy hair, letting out a long sigh. He didn't notice Elon watching him until he looked up. "Tough day?" Elon asked, his voice low. The doctor blinked, startled. "You could say that." Elon tilted his head. "Why do you do it then? Work in a place like this?" The doctor hesitated, then shrugged. "Because I thought I could make a difference. But some days, it feels like I'm just patching holes in a sinking ship." "Then why stay?" Elon pressed. The doctor laughed bitterly. "Because even if the ship sinks, you've still got to try to save as many people as you can." Elon nodded, his respect for the staff growing with every conversation. These people weren't the problem. They were the heroes fighting against impossible odds. As night fell, Elon watched the hospital shift into its evening routine. The chaos didn't stop, but it slowed, becoming a steady hum instead of a roar. He felt the exhaustion in the air. The weight of another day passed. But Elon wasn't tired. If anything, he felt more awake than ever. He now understood the stakes, the human cost of a broken system. And though he hadn't yet revealed his identity, he knew that when he did, it would change everything. In the meantime, he would stay in the shadows, learning everything he could. Because sometimes, to fix a problem, you had to experience it firsthand. The night shift brought a different energy to the hospital. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over weary staff, and the hum of machines echoed louder in the quieter halls. Elon, still disguised as Ernie, observed it all. He noticed how the hospital felt heavier at night, as if the weight of unspoken struggles hung in the air. Elon settled back into his corner of the waiting room, pulling his ragged coat tighter against the chill of the over-air-conditioned space. A janitor mopped the floor nearby, his movements slow and deliberate, as if this were the only quiet moment he'd get all night. Then, through the lull of the night, Elon heard it, a faint, muffled sob coming from a nearby hallway. He turned his head, straining to locate the source. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, the kind of cry that came from someone who had been holding back for far too long. Curiosity and instinct propelled him forward. He shuffled down the hall, careful to remain unnoticed, until he found the source. A young woman huddled in a corner near the vending machines. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her scrubs identified her as a nurse, but the way she clutched her knees to her chest made her look like a lost child. "Are you okay?" Elon's gravelly voice cut through the silence. The nurse flinched, looking up with wide, tear-filled eyes. I'm fine," she stammered, quickly wiping her face. "Just tired." Elon nodded, sitting down on the bench a few feet away from her. "Tired doesn't make you cry like that." She hesitated, as if debating whether to open up to a stranger. But there was something about Ernie's presence, calm, unassuming, that made her feel safe. "It's just everything," she admitted finally. "We're short-staffed again tonight. I've been on my feet for 12 hours straight. And there's this patient, an older man in the ICU. He keeps asking for his family, but no one's come. I don't even think they're going to. And I can't do it all." Her voice cracked, and the tears came again, spilling over despite her best efforts to hold them back. Elon leaned forward, his expression softening. "What's his name?" The nurse sniffled, surprised by the question. "Mr. Whitman, room 306. Has anyone tried reaching his family?" She nodded. "We called them, left messages. But I don't think they care. He's just an old man to them." Elon frowned. He'd seen this before, how people slip through the cracks not just in systems, but in relationships. He thought about how easily someone like Mr. Whitman could be overlooked, even forgotten, in a world moving too fast. The nurse glanced at him, curiosity breaking through her sadness. "Why do you care?" Elon shrugged, staying in character. "Because someone has to. And because I know what it's like to feel alone." His words hung in the air, heavier than he intended. The nurse studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "It's the worst feeling." For a few moments, they sat in silence, connected by an unspoken understanding. Then the nurse wiped her face again and stood. "I should get back. Thanks for listening." Elon watched her go, her shoulders a little straighter than before. He stayed seated for a while, his mind turning over what she had said. Later that night, as the hospital quieted even further, Elon made his way to the ICU. He moved carefully, blending into the shadows like he had during countless factory inspections and secret site visits. When he reached room 306, he peeked inside. Mr. Whitman lay in the bed, his frail body almost swallowed by the blankets. He was awake, staring at the ceiling with a vacant expression. Machines beeped softly around him, the only sounds breaking the silence. Elon hesitated, unsure what he was doing here. But then Mr. Whitman turned his head, his eyes meeting Elon's. They were tired eyes, but not without warmth. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice raspy. "Just someone passing through," Elon replied, stepping inside. Mr. Whitman chuckled weakly. "Well, you don't look like a doctor." "I'm not," Elon admitted, pulling up a chair, "but I'm a good listener." The older man studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You know, it's funny. I built houses for 40 years, raised 3 kids, and now, here I am, alone in this bed. I never thought it would end like this." "It doesn't have to," Elon said quietly. "Your story isn't over yet." Mr. Whitman smiled faintly. "You're an odd one, aren't you? But I like you." When Elon finally left the room, the weight of the night pressed down on him. The nurse's words, Mr. Whitman's loneliness, they weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of something larger, something broken. As he walked back to his corner of the waiting room, his mind was already racing with ideas. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a personal experiment anymore. It was a mission. If you were in Mr. Whitman's shoes, what would you want someone to say or do for you? Share your thoughts below. The early morning hours in the hospital felt different, almost surreal. The sterile air carried a quiet hum of exhaustion. Elon, still wrapped in the guise of Ernie, stirred awake in his corner of the waiting room as nurses changed shifts. His mind was restless, replaying the stories of the night. The young nurse overwhelmed by her burdens and Mr. Whitman, quietly awaiting a family that might never arrive. As sunlight began to creep through the tall hospital windows, Elon's focus sharpened. He wasn't here just to observe anymore. He needed to act. He pulled a small notebook from the inner pocket of his coat, one he had been using to jot down details, delays in treatment, staffing shortages, equipment failures, and stories like Mr. Whitman's. This wasn't just data, it was evidence. His thoughts were interrupted when a commotion broke out near the reception desk. A middle-aged man in a suit argued loudly with one of the nurses. His voice carried through the waiting room, sharp and indignant. "I've been waiting for hours," the man shouted, his face red. "Do you people even care about your patients?" The nurse, a veteran who had likely dealt with 1,000 such complaints, maintained a professional tone. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but we're doing everything we can." "Clearly, you're not," the man snapped, slamming his palm on the desk. "This is unacceptable." Elon watched the scene unfold, his jaw tightening. He had seen entitlement before, but here, in this setting, it felt especially grating. The nurse's face betrayed a flicker of weariness, but she continued trying to de-escalate the situation. Before he could think twice, Elon stood and shuffled toward the desk. "Hey," he called out, his voice gravelly but firm. "Maybe you should sit down and let them do their job." The man turned to face him, his eyes narrowing at Elon's disheveled appearance. "And who the hell are you?" "Just someone who knows yelling won't make the line move faster," Elon replied, his tone calm but edged with steel. The man scoffed. "Of course you'd say that. You're not the one waiting for important news." Elon didn't flinch. "You think your time's more valuable than theirs?" He gestured to the other patients, many of whom were watching the exchange with a mix of curiosity and approval. "Everyone here has a story, and none of them are less important than yours." The man hesitated, clearly caught off guard. After a moment, he muttered something under his breath and walked back to his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment. The nurse at the desk gave Elon a small, grateful smile. "Thanks for that," she said softly. Elon nodded. "You shouldn't have to deal with that. You've got enough on your plate." She chuckled dryly. You have no idea? Oh, I'm starting to, Elon replied, his tone laced with meaning. Later that morning, Lily appeared again, her energy already drained despite the day just beginning. She approached Elon with a steaming cup of coffee, offering it to him with a hesitant smile. Peace offering, she said, for all the chaos you've been witnessing. Elon accepted it, surprised by the gesture. Thanks. Though, I think I'm the one who should be offering you a break. She laughed lightly, sitting on the edge of a nearby chair. If only. But honestly, I'm glad you're here. You see things most people don't. Her words hung in the air, sparking an idea in Elon's mind. What would you change if you could? He asked suddenly. Lily blinked. What? If you had the power to fix this place, to make it work the way it's supposed to, what would you do? She frowned, caught off guard by the question. That's a big question. Start small, Elon said. One thing. Lily thought for a moment, then said, more staff. We're always short, and it affects everything. Patient care, our own mental health. You can't save people when you're running on fumes. Elon nodded, jotting it down in his notebook. Anything else? She hesitated. More transparency. Sometimes, it feels like we're kept in the dark about decisions that directly impact us. We need to be part of the conversation. Elon's pen scratched against the paper. He looked up, meeting her gaze. What if I told you those things could change? She laughed, shaking her head. I'd say you've been watching too many feel-good movies. Maybe, Elon said, a small smile playing on his lips. But sometimes, change starts with one person. The rest of the day passed in a blur of observations and quiet conversations. Elon's notebook filled with more notes, stories of missed opportunities, overwhelmed staff, and patients like Mr. Whitman, whose only crime was being forgotten. By evening, Elon felt a new resolve. He couldn't reveal his identity just yet, but he knew he was getting closer to understanding the full scope of the problem. And with that understanding, he could begin to craft a solution. As he settled back into his corner for the night, he thought about Lily's words. You see things most people don't. It was true. But what mattered more was what he would do with what he saw. As the second night fell, the hospital corridors seemed even more somber, the weight of untold stories pressing down like a suffocating blanket. Elon, still blending seamlessly into his role as Ernie, was no longer just an observer. His mind churned with ideas and questions. The stories he'd gathered from staff and patients painted a grim picture of a system straining under its own weight, held together by overworked heroes and fleeting moments of hope. The evening brought new faces to the waiting room. A young couple nervously holding hands, a middle-aged man pacing back and forth, a teenager scrolling absent-mindedly on their phone. Elon's sharp eyes took in every detail, every nuance of their body language. Each person here carried an invisible burden, and each burden told a story. One story, however, caught his attention almost immediately. A mother and her young son, no older than 5, sat in the corner. The boy had an oxygen mask strapped to his face, his small frame curled against his mother's side. The woman, her face lined with exhaustion, kept glancing at the reception desk as if waiting for news. Elon hesitated. He wasn't sure how much more heartbreak he could take tonight, but something about the boy's wide, tired eyes drew him in. Finally, he shuffled over and sat on the edge of a chair nearby. Hey there, buddy, Elon said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that Ernie hadn't shown before. What's your name? The boy looked up, his gaze flickering with curiosity. Tyler, he whispered through the mask. Elon smiled. Nice to meet you, Tyler. I'm Ernie. How are you feeling? Tyler's mother, startled by the interaction, straightened slightly. He's okay, she answered for him, her tone polite but guarded. Just tired. Elon nodded, understanding her hesitation. Long night, huh? She sighed, the weight of her reality slipping into her voice. Every night's long when you're here. As they talked, Elon learned bits and pieces of their story. Tyler had been in and out of the hospital for months due to a rare respiratory condition. The treatments were expensive, and insurance only covered so much. His mother, Emma, had been forced to quit her job to care for him full-time, leaving them reliant on what little savings they had left. "I don't know how much longer we can do this," Emma admitted, her voice trembling. "I just want him to get better, but everything feels like it's against us." Elon's chest tightened. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the kind that came from fighting an unwinnable battle. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly, "and Tyler's lucky to have you." Emma managed a weak smile. "Thanks, but strength doesn't pay the bills." Elon's mind raced. He wanted to help her, to pull her out of this impossible situation, but he couldn't do it as Ernie. Not yet. The conversation was interrupted by the nurse from earlier, the one Elon had stood up for at the reception desk. She approached hesitantly, glancing between Elon and Emma. "Miss Carter," she said gently, "Dr. Jacobs can see Tyler now." Emma nodded, her relief palpable. She stood, helping Tyler to his feet. "Thank you," she said to Elon, her voice full of quiet gratitude, "for listening." Elon watched them go, his heart heavy. He knew he couldn't save everyone, but stories like Emma and Tyler's made it painfully clear that the system was failing those who needed it most. Later that night, Elon wandered the hospital halls, his thoughts restless. He passed by the staff break room and paused when he heard voices inside. The door was slightly ajar, allowing him to catch snippets of a heated conversation. "Been telling them for months we need more supplies," a voice said, frustration evident. "But they keep cutting the budget." "I know," another voice replied. "And now they're talking about layoffs. How are we supposed to keep this place running with even fewer people?" Elon leaned closer, his heart sinking. These weren't just isolated incidents. This was a systemic issue, one that ran deeper than he'd initially realized. The hospital wasn't just overwhelmed. It was being neglected. He returned to his corner of the waiting room, his notebook now brimming with more than just observations. It was filled with questions. Why were budget cuts happening in a facility already stretched thin? Who was making these decisions? And how could he, one man, start to unravel such a tangled web? Elon didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about understanding the problem anymore. It was about finding a way to fix it. As he lay back against the cold wall, staring up at the flickering fluorescent lights, a single thought burned in his mind. People like Emma and Tyler shouldn't have to fight alone. The third day began with the familiar hum of hospital life. Nurses shuffling between patients, muffled voices echoing in the corridors, and the occasional cry from a child in pain. For Elon, it was another day to dig deeper into the hospital's unseen fractures. As Ernie, he had successfully blended into the shadows, but the time for passive observation was drawing to a close. Elon started the morning with Lily, the nurse who had shared her frustrations with him the day before. She sat across from him in the break room, sipping her coffee, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Rough night?" Elon asked, his tone casual but concerned. "Rough life," she replied with a tired smile. "But yeah, we had a code blue at 3 a.m. Patient didn't make it. She was only 45. I don't think her family even made it in time." Elon nodded, his heart sinking at the weight of her words. "I don't know how you do it," he said. "Day after day, seeing all this." Lily shrugged. "You don't think about it." "Not really. If you do, it eats you alive." Her words lingered in Elon's mind as she left to tend to her next patient. He realized that the hospital staff weren't just overwhelmed. They were emotionally battered, carrying the weight of every life lost and every battle fought. That afternoon, Elon decided to explore beyond the waiting room. He wandered the halls, careful not to draw attention to himself. He passed by the pediatric wing, where laughter and tears mixed in equal measure. He saw children with 4 drips playing with stuffed animals, their smiles a testament to resilience in the face of hardship. He stopped outside a room where a doctor was speaking with a patient's family. The conversation was hushed, but Elon caught snippets: experimental treatment, insurance complications, next steps unclear. The family's faces were etched with worry, their hands clasped tightly together. Elon's chest tightened. How many families were caught in this limbo, torn between hope and despair because of financial barriers? It was a question that gnawed at him relentlessly. As the day stretched on, Elon found himself drawn to the staff lounge again. This time, he didn't hover outside. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, earning a few curious glances. "What are you doing here?" one of the nurses asked, her tone a mix of surprise and suspicion. Elon scratched his scruffy beard, playing up the role of Ernie. "Just wanted to say thanks," he said simply, "for everything you guys do. People don't say it enough." The room fell quiet for a moment, the tension softening. A young doctor chuckled. "You picked a strange way to say it, sitting in the waiting room for days." Elon smiled. "Guess I'm just a strange guy." The room lightened with laughter, and the conversation resumed. Elon listened closely as the staff vented about their struggles: short staffing, outdated equipment, unresponsive administration. He took mental notes, each complaint adding another piece to the puzzle. Later, as Elon returned to the waiting room, he spotted Emma and Tyler again. Tyler was asleep in a wheelchair, his small body swaddled in a hospital blanket. Emma sat beside him, her eyes distant. Elon approached quietly, careful not to wake the boy. "How's he doing?" he asked softly. Emma looked up, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Better, for now. They're adjusting his treatment, but it's going to be expensive." She hesitated before adding, "I don't know how I'm going to pay for it." Elon crouched down to her level, his gaze steady. "You'll find a way," he said, his voice firm, "because you're stronger than this system. And if the system won't help you, maybe it's time someone fixed the system." Emma blinked, surprised by his conviction. "What do you mean?" Elon hesitated. He couldn't reveal his identity yet, but he couldn't stay silent either. "Just don't give up," he said finally. "There are people out there who can make things better. You'd be surprised." That night, Elon sat in his usual corner, his notebook open on his lap. The pages were filled with observations, questions, and ideas. But tonight, he began writing something new, a plan. He thought about the staff's complaints, the family's struggles, and the hospital's systemic failures. He thought about Emma and Tyler, about Lily, and about all the people whose lives were being shaped by forces beyond their control. It wasn't enough to understand the problem anymore. It was time to do something about it. The early hours of the morning cast a gray pallor over the hospital. Elon, still Ernie to those around him, had barely slept. The notebook in his lap was now a web of interconnected thoughts, stories from patients, complaints from staff, and observations he had gleaned while shadowing the hospital's daily grind. But it wasn't just about identifying the cracks in the system anymore. It was about understanding who had let those cracks widen and why. The opportunity to dig deeper came sooner than expected. In the cafeteria, Elon overheard a conversation between two hospital administrators seated a few tables away. Their voices were low, but the tone suggested urgency. "If we don't get that grant renewal, we're looking at cutting at least 2 departments," one of them muttered. The other side, "It's not just about the grant. The donors are pulling back too. And then there's the litigation." Elon's ears perked up. Litigation? Donors pulling back? He pretended to fiddle with his cup of coffee, inching closer to their table. "We've got to keep this quiet," the first administrator continued. "If the board finds out, we're all in trouble, especially after last quarter's numbers." Elon's mind raced. Last quarter's numbers? What were they referring to? Financial mismanagement? Something darker? The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but he needed more information. Later that day, Elon sought out Lily, the nurse who had become an unintentional confidant. He found her in the supply closet, sorting through a meager selection of medical tools. "You've worked here a long time, right?" he asked casually. Lily glanced at him, a little surprised. "Yeah, almost 8 years. Why?" Elon leaned against the doorframe. "I keep hearing about budget cuts and layoffs. Has it always been like this?" Lily paused, her expression darkening. "Not always, but it's gotten worse over the last few years. Ever since they brought in the new administrator, it's been all about the bottom line. Patient care comes second, if that." "Who's the new administrator?" Elon asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Gregory Price," Lily said, her tone laced with disdain. "He's all suits and spreadsheets. Barely sets foot outside his office unless there's a photo op." Elon decided it was time to learn more about Gregory Price. That evening, He ventured into the hospital's administrative wing. The halls were quieter here, the air colder. Most of the offices were locked, but a few still had lights on. He spotted an open door near the end of the corridor. Inside, a young man sat at a desk, typing furiously on his computer. Elon knocked lightly on the door frame, and the man looked up, startled. "Sorry to bother you," Elon said, feigning hesitation. "I'm just curious about how things work around here. You know, from the administrative side." The man blinked, clearly confused. "Who are you?" "Ernie," Elon said, extending a hand. "Just a visitor. But I've been here for a few days, and I can't help noticing how hard everyone's working. Figured there's got to be a lot going on behind the scenes." The man hesitated before shaking his hand. "I'm Mark. I handle data analysis for the hospital. It's not exactly glamorous." "Data analysis?" Elon echoed, his curiosity piqued. "Like budgets and stuff?" Mark nodded. "Budgets, staffing, patient outcomes, you name it." Elon leaned in slightly. "So, what's the deal with all these cuts? Everyone's talking about them." Mark hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but the hospital's in trouble. Big trouble. The board's been cutting corners to save money, but it's only making things worse. And Price? He's more worried about keeping the donors happy than fixing the real problems." Elon pressed for more details, but Mark grew wary and ended the conversation quickly. Still, Elon had learned enough to confirm his suspicions. The hospital's issues weren't just systemic, they were deliberate. That night, Elon sat in his usual corner of the waiting room, his mind buzzing. He thought about Emma and Tyler, about the overworked nurses and underfunded departments. These weren't just stories, they were symptoms of a larger disease. And Gregory Price was at the heart of it. The clock in the hospital waiting room struck midnight, its soft chimes swallowed by the steady hum of machines and distant footsteps. Elon, still buried in his thoughts, stared at the pages of his notebook. Each scribbled line was a piece of a puzzle, but the picture it painted was far from complete. He knew Gregory Price wasn't acting alone. An institution as vast and complex as this hospital couldn't crumble under the weight of one man's incompetence. No, this was a chain reaction, a system that had been compromised from multiple angles. But how deep did the rot go? Elon's opportunity to dig deeper came in the form of an unlikely ally. Mark, the young data analyst he had spoken to earlier. Around 1 a.m., Mark slipped into the waiting room, looking around nervously before approaching Elon. "Ernie," Mark whispered, "do you have a minute?" Elon looked up, feigning surprise. "Sure. What's up?" Mark gestured for him to follow, leading him to a secluded corner of the cafeteria. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow on the empty tables. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," Mark began, his voice trembling slightly, "but you seem different. Like you actually care about what's going on here." Elon leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I do care, Mark. Tell me what you know." Mark hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "The hospital's finances aren't just bad, they're being manipulated. Price is funneling money out of critical departments to make the hospital look more profitable on paper. It's all about optics, for the donors and the board." Elon's jaw tightened. "What about patient care? Staffing? Equipment?" Mark shook his head. "It's not a priority for him. As long as the books look good, he doesn't care if we're running on fumes. And the worst part? He's not the only one involved. A couple of board members are in on it too. They're using the hospital as a stepping stone for political and corporate gain." Mark pulled a USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "I've been tracking the discrepancies," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This has data from the last 3 quarters, budget cuts, redirected funds, everything. But I can't take this to anyone. If Price finds out..." Elon picked up the drive, his mind racing. This was the kind of evidence that could expose the corruption, but it was also dangerous. If Price and his allies were willing to sabotage patient care for their own gain, there was no telling how far they'd go to protect themselves. "Why are you giving this to me?" Elon asked. Mark hesitated, then sighed. "Because I'm scared. And because I've seen what this place has done to good people. My sister was a patient here 2 years ago. She didn't make it. The doctors did everything they could, but they were understaffed, and the equipment wasn't up to par. I don't want anyone else to go through that. Elon nodded, slipping the drive into his pocket. You're doing the right thing, Mark. I'll make sure this gets to the right people. Back in his corner of the waiting room, Elon connected the USB drive to his laptop. The files were a goldmine of information: spreadsheets, emails, and internal memos that painted a damning picture of financial mismanagement and ethical violations. One email, in particular, stood out. It was from Gregory Price to a board member, detailing plans to shut down the pediatric wing to reallocate resources to more profitable departments. Elon's blood boiled as he read the cold, calculated words. He thought of Tyler, the boy whose life was hanging in the balance, and Emma, the mother fighting tooth and nail to save him. The pediatric wing wasn't just a department, it was a lifeline for countless families, and Price was willing to cut it for the sake of his own ambitions. The next morning, Elon sought out Emma. He found her in the pediatric wing, sitting beside Tyler's bed. The boy was awake, his face pale but his eyes bright with curiosity as he played with a small toy car. Ernie, Emma said, smiling weakly. What brings you here? Elon crouched beside her, lowering his voice. Emma, I need to ask you something. If you could change the way this hospital works, if you could fix the problems, what would you do? Emma blinked, surprised by the question. I don't know. I guess I'd make sure no parent ever has to choose between their child's life and their bank account. And I'd give the staff what they need to do their jobs. They work so hard, but they're stretched so thin. Elon nodded, her words solidifying his resolve. You're right, and I promise, things are going to change. That night, Elon began drafting a plan. He couldn't just expose Price and the board. He needed to present a solution, a way to rebuild the hospital from the ground up. It was a monumental task, but he had the resources, the connections, and the determination to make it happen. As he wrote, he couldn't help but wonder, how would the hospital staff react when they learned the truth about Ernie? The next few days felt like a tense waiting game. Elon, still under the guise of Ernie, had quietly begun gathering his evidence, reaching out to key contacts, and laying the groundwork for the biggest challenge of his life. But even as he pieced the puzzle together, he couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The deeper he delved, the more he realized just how far-reaching the corruption was, and how dangerous his next steps could be. Emma's words from earlier in the week kept echoing in Elon's mind. She was right. The staff was stretched thin, doing their best with the little they had, while the higher-ups played their games with hospital funds. It was clear now, the hospital wasn't just failing. It was being actively sabotaged from within. He spent countless hours at his makeshift desk in the waiting room, dissecting the files Mark had given him. With each new document, it became increasingly clear. Price was working with key members of the board to pull off a scheme that not only endangered the patients but also enriched themselves through kickbacks from outside companies. But it wasn't just about money, it was about control. Price and his allies were using the hospital's resources to manipulate public perception, making it appear as if they were doing the right thing, all while silently dismantling the very institution they were sworn to protect. Elon knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed more allies, people who could help him expose the truth. But there was a risk in trusting others, especially in a place as deeply entrenched in corruption as this one. The stakes were high, and the wrong person could ruin everything. So, he took a calculated risk. He called in a few favors, reaching out to some of the most trusted whistleblowers in the healthcare industry. Among them was an old friend, Jenna, who had worked as an investigative journalist for a well-known news outlet before her recent departure. He knew she had the skills to help him navigate the complex world of corporate malpractice, and more importantly, she was unafraid of taking on the system. Jenna arrived 2 days later, her eyes scanning the hospital's sterile halls as they met in the quietest corner of the building. The tension was palpable as she took in the sight of Elon, who was once a name that echoed across tech circles, now reduced to a humble, weary figure in a faded jacket. Elon, she began, her voice soft but filled with concern. I don't know if I should be here. You sure about this? Taking down an institution like this, it's no small feat. Elon gave her a small nod, his mind laser-focused on the task at hand. It's not just about bringing down an institution, Jenna. It's about saving the lives that are being ignored. I've seen it, heard it, and now I have the proof. But I need your help to make it public. Jenna's brow furrowed. What are you asking me to do, exactly? The next few days felt like a tense waiting game. Elon, still under the guise of Ernie, had quietly begun gathering his evidence, reaching out to key contacts, and laying the groundwork for the biggest challenge of his life. But even as he pieced the puzzle together, he couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The deeper he delved, the more he realized just how far-reaching the corruption was, and how dangerous his next steps could be. Emma's words from earlier in the week kept echoing in Elon's mind. She was right. The staff was stretched thin, doing their best with the little they had, while the higher-ups played their games with hospital funds. It was clear now, the hospital wasn't just failing. It was being actively sabotaged from within. He spent countless hours at his makeshift desk in the waiting room, dissecting the files Mark had given him. With each new document, it became increasingly clear. Price was working with key members of the board to pull off a scheme that not only endangered the patients but also enriched themselves through kickbacks from outside companies. But it wasn't just about money, it was about control. Price and his allies were using the hospital's resources to manipulate public perception, making it appear as if they were doing the right thing, all while silently dismantling the very institution they were sworn to protect. Elon knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed more allies, people who could help him expose the truth. But there was a risk in trusting others, especially in a place as deeply entrenched in corruption as this one. The stakes were high, and the wrong person could ruin everything. So, he took a calculated risk. He called in a few favors, reaching out to some of the most trusted whistleblowers in the healthcare industry. Among them was an old friend, Jenna, who had worked as an investigative journalist for a well-known news outlet before her recent departure. He knew she had the skills to help him navigate the complex world of corporate malpractice, and more importantly, she was unafraid of taking on the system. Jenna arrived 2 days later, her eyes scanning the hospital's sterile halls as they met in the quietest corner of the building. The tension was palpable as she took in the sight of Elon, who was once a name that echoed across tech circles, now reduced to a humble, weary figure in a faded jacket. "Elon," she began, her voice soft but filled with concern, "I don't know if I should be here. You sure about this? Taking down an institution like this, it's no small feat." Elon gave her a small nod, his mind laser-focused on the task at hand. "It's not just about bringing down an institution, Jenna. It's about saving the lives that are being ignored. I've seen it, heard it, and now I have the proof. But I need your help to make it public." Jenna's brow furrowed. "What are you asking me to do, exactly?" "I need you to help me break this story wide open. I've got the evidence, but I can't go public with it alone. I need your connections, your platform. You can help me make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." She thought for a moment, her eyes narrowing with determination. "All right, but we do this my way. I'll need to verify everything, no shortcuts. And once it's out, there's no going back." Over the next few days, Jenna and Elon worked tirelessly, combing through the hospital's financial records, cross-referencing patient complaints, and corroborating testimonies from staff members who were willing to speak out. Every document, every piece of evidence was scrutinized for authenticity, making sure they wouldn't be dismissed as baseless accusations. But even as the plan took shape, there was a creeping sense of urgency. Price and his allies were starting to catch on. The walls seemed to close in a little tighter with every passing hour, as if the very air inside the hospital was becoming charged with suspicion. One evening, as Elon sat at his usual spot, he noticed something odd. A pair of men in suits were walking briskly down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They stopped outside Gregory Price's office, exchanging quick words before disappearing behind the door. Elon didn't recognize them, but their presence sent a shiver down his spine. He quickly tapped into the hospital's internal surveillance system, something he had managed to hack into during his time posing as Ernie, and replayed the footage. The two men were escorted in by Price himself, and they seemed to be in deep conversation. The next morning, Elon could sense the change. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to break. His gut told him that the final confrontation was near, but he wasn't ready to make his move just yet. There were still pieces to be put into place, still information to gather. The plan needed to be perfect, but with each passing hour, Elon felt like he was being pulled deeper into the web of intrigue. The stakes were higher now. Not only was the hospital on the line, but his own safety, and the safety of those he had come to care for, was in jeopardy. Price and his allies were powerful, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. The days were blending together, each one feeling like a tense precursor to something inevitable. Elon could feel the pressure mounting as Gregory Price and his cohorts tightened their grip on the hospital. The once quiet halls now buzzed with whispered rumors and uneasy glances. The calm before the storm had passed, and the storm was coming faster than Elon had anticipated. It was late one evening when the first real sign of danger arrived. Elon was in the staff lounge, reviewing the final pieces of evidence Jenna had gathered. She had managed to connect the dots between Price's financial dealings and several shell companies linked to pharmaceutical suppliers. The more Elon looked at the evidence, the more disgusted he became. Price's greed knew no bounds. But it wasn't just the money. It was the lives he was willing to sacrifice to feed his empire. As Elon prepared to leave for the night, the overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. He froze, sensing something wasn't right. He glanced at his phone. It was almost 11 p.m., and the corridors of the hospital were eerily quiet. Just as he turned to gather his things, a loud noise echoed through the hallway. The sound of hurried footsteps approaching, followed by a knock at the door. Before he could react, the door swung open. Jenna stood there, her face pale, eyes wide with panic. "Elon," she gasped, her voice trembling. "We've been compromised." Elon stood up, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" Jenna took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I went to check on the documents I left in the storage room. When I got there, I found that someone had been through them. The files were tampered with." Elon's mind raced. "Do you think Price knows?" Jenna nodded grimly. "I'm sure of it. Whoever's behind this knows we've been gathering evidence. They've been watching us." A cold wave of realization washed over Elon. They weren't just dealing with financial corruption. They were up against a far more insidious force, one that could not only ruin lives but also eliminate anyone who dared to expose them. The hospital wasn't just a battleground for resources. It was now a battleground for survival. "We need to move fast," Elon said, his voice calm but urgent. "We don't have much time. Price will do whatever it takes to protect himself, and if he's already onto us, we need to act before it's too late." Jenna nodded, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. "How do we expose this without putting ourselves in danger? If they're already watching us?" Elon took a deep breath, staring at the pile of documents in front of him. "We go public. We don't wait for the perfect moment. We make one." The next morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Elon knew that any further delay would put everything at risk. Jenna had arranged a meeting with her former colleagues at the news outlet. They had agreed to meet in secret at a nearby cafe to discuss the next steps. As Elon walked through the hospital's maze of corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every glance, every creak of the floorboards, felt like it was a signal. He wasn't just Ernie anymore. He was a man on the verge of exposing a system of corruption that went deeper than anyone could have imagined. At the cafe, Jenna was waiting with a couple of familiar faces from her past. One was a seasoned investigative reporter named Daniel, and the other was a tech expert named Carla, who had worked with Jenna on several high-profile stories. "Elon," Jenna said, her voice low. "This is Daniel and Carla. They're the ones who will help us get the story out." Elon shook hands with both of them, recognizing the gravity of the moment. He had gone from being an outsider to someone caught in the heart of a storm, and now he was relying on others to help bring the truth to light. "We've reviewed the files," Daniel said, his voice steady. "This is worse than we thought. But we need more than just evidence. We need witnesses, people inside the hospital who can confirm everything." Elon's stomach twisted. He knew the risks, but the stakes were too high. "Do we have anyone?" Carla spoke up, her eyes sharp. "We've got a few leads. Some of the staff members are willing to speak out, but they're scared. We need to make sure they're protected. Jenna nodded. We've got a plan to get the story out, but it's going to take time. We have to move carefully. Price and his people will be watching for any sign of weakness. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon felt a renewed sense of urgency. The pieces were coming together, but the clock was ticking. With every passing day, Price's grip on the hospital tightened, and the more Elon uncovered, the more dangerous it became to expose the truth. He left the cafe with a plan in place, but as he walked down the street toward the hospital, something caught his eye. A black SUV parked across the street, its windows tinted. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside was watching him. Later that night, as Elon sat at his makeshift desk in the waiting room, a chilling realization crept over him. The people behind the conspiracy were close, too close. And with each new piece of evidence, he felt the weight of the danger pressing down on him. There was no turning back now. Have you ever had to expose a truth that could change everything? What would you do if you were in Elon's position, knowing that the consequences could be dire? Share your thoughts with us. The weight of everything that had happened began to settle heavily on Elon's shoulders. Despite his calculated calm, the risks were growing by the hour. Every step he took now seemed fraught with danger. Price wasn't just some corrupt figure. He was a powerful man who had a network of influence and power that extended far beyond the walls of this hospital. Elon knew that exposing him would be a monumental task. But he also knew one thing. He couldn't back down now. Too many lives were at stake. The morning after their meeting with Daniel and Carla, Elon decided to take a more direct approach. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. They needed a way to get the information to the public as soon as possible, before Price could shut them down. He walked into the hospital with a clear mission in mind. He would meet with Dr. Lisa Grant, one of the most trusted physicians on the hospital's staff and someone he had quietly been working with for the past week. Lisa was a longtime friend of Jenna's, and Elon knew she had first-hand knowledge of the hospital's financial malfeasance. Lisa was also one of the few doctors still genuinely committed to the hospital's mission of patient care. But she had witnessed Price and his associates gutting the resources, making it impossible for the staff to do their jobs effectively. As Elon walked down the familiar sterile hallways, he could feel the tension building in the air. Something was off. He reached Lisa's office and knocked softly on the door. "Come in," she called from inside. Elon opened the door and stepped in, his eyes immediately landing on Lisa, who was sorting through a pile of patient files on her desk. "Elon," she said, looking up with a smile that quickly faded as she saw the urgency in his eyes. "What's going on? You're here earlier than usual." "I've got something important to discuss," he said, his voice low. "It's about Price. I think it's time we move forward." Lisa looked around nervously, then closed the door behind him. "Are you sure? If we do this, there's no turning back. Price won't let us get away with it. You've seen what he's capable of." Elon nodded. "I know, but we can't just sit back and watch him ruin everything. We need to act." Lisa hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "All right, let's do this." She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a small flash drive. "I've got everything on here. The financial records, the falsified patient reports, and a few recordings of Price making deals with outside contractors. If we go public, this will be the smoking gun we need." Elon took the flash drive, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. But before he could speak, there was a knock at the door. Elon froze, and Lisa quickly slid the flash drive back into the drawer. "Just a second," she called out. The door creaked open, and one of the hospital's security guards, a large man with a stern face, stepped in. "Dr. Grant," he said, glancing at Elon with a look of suspicion. "The director wants to see you in his office immediately." Lisa's face paled. "Now?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yes, right away," the guard replied, his tone unyielding. As the guard left, Elon and Lisa exchanged a look. They both knew this wasn't a coincidence. Price had probably gotten wind of their plans, and he was starting to make his move. "Go," Elon said quickly. "Get out of here. I'll stay behind and cover you." Lisa nodded, her expression filled with resolve. "Be careful, Elon. This is only the beginning." The moment Lisa left, Elon took action. He grabbed the flash drive from her desk and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He had no intention of leaving the hospital without it. If Price was going to make his move, he would be ready. Elon moved quickly through the hospital, keeping to the less crowded hallways. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. The next step was to get the flash drive to Jenna. They had to act quickly before Price or anyone else could get their hands on the evidence. As he rounded a corner near the hospital's exit, Elon froze. Standing at the end of the hallway, two men in suits were talking in low voices. They were too far away for him to hear clearly, but he recognized one of them immediately, Gregory Price. His heart skipped a beat as he realized that Price must have been watching Lisa. The man was always one step ahead, and Elon had underestimated just how far Price was willing to go to protect himself. With his pulse racing, Elon took a deep breath and began to retreat down the hall. He needed to stay out of sight, keep his cover intact, and wait for the right moment to act. But the more he watched, the more he realized just how tightly Price had his claws in the hospital. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. And if Price thought Elon was a threat, he would do anything to eliminate him. Elon reached a secluded stairwell and quickly made his way down to the ground floor. He needed to find Jenna and get the flash drive to her. Time was running out. As he stepped outside into the cold night air, he pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Jenna. "We're on. Meet me at the cafe in 15 minutes. Bring Daniel and Carla. It's happening now." But just as he hit send, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Elon," a voice said, smooth and chilling. "I hope you're enjoying your little game, but I think it's time you understood the stakes. You've crossed a line, and there's no going back. We know what you're up to. We're coming for you." The line went dead. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't need to hear anything more. Price knew, and the fight was only just beginning. Elon's mind was racing. The voice on the other end of the phone had made one thing clear. Price was no longer just a shadowy figure pulling strings from behind the scenes. He was directly involved now, and he was fully aware of what Elon was planning. The warning couldn't have been more ominous. "We're coming for you." His first instinct was to run, but that wasn't an option. If he disappeared now, it would only confirm that he had something to hide. Price would close in on him with everything he had, and he couldn't afford to lose this fight, not when so much was at stake. Elon took a deep breath and focused. He knew he had to think this through. The clock was ticking. Jenna, Daniel, and Carla were depending on him. He needed to get the flash drive to them before Price or anyone else found out what they were up to. The next few hours could change everything. He glanced around the hospital parking lot. His car was parked under the dim lights in a corner. But just as he reached for his keys, a car pulled up in front of the entrance. He immediately recognized the driver, a man who worked as Price's personal security. The man stepped out of the car, looking around with a sense of urgency. Elon's pulse quickened. He couldn't afford to be seen. Quickly, he ducked behind a nearby pillar, hoping the shadows would conceal him. As he crouched down, he noticed two other men stepping out of the car. They were clearly searching for something, or someone. They moved toward the building, speaking in hushed tones. Elon strained to hear them. From what he could make out, they were looking for someone who had been snooping around the hospital late at night. Someone who had been asking too many questions. Elon's stomach churned. They were looking for him. He needed to move, and fast. He glanced at his phone once more, checking the time. Jenna, Daniel, and Carla were waiting. If he didn't get to them soon, the window for action would close. He darted across the parking lot, keeping low to the ground. Every step felt like a gamble. The darkness provided some cover, but he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him. He was being hunted, and there was no way to tell how close they were to catching him. As he reached the side street, he took a sharp turn, heading toward the back entrance of the cafe where Jenna and the others were supposed to meet him. The plan was simple: get them the evidence and then figure out the next move. But as Elon approached the cafe, he realized something was wrong. The back door was ajar, and there were no signs of anyone waiting inside. Panic flared in his chest. Had they been compromised? Elon cautiously stepped inside, his heart thudding in his chest. The place was eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the back. He walked deeper into the cafe. eyes scanning for any sign of Jenna, Daniel, or Carla. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a soft noise, a muffled voice, followed by a faint clink of glass. Elon froze, his breath caught in his throat. He had to move quickly, or he might miss them. He stepped silently toward the source of the sound. As he rounded the corner, he saw Jenna, Daniel, and Carla huddled together at a table, whispering in low voices. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. Elon took a step forward, but then the door behind him creaked. His heart skipped a beat. He whipped around, ready for anything. Standing in the doorway was a familiar face, Gregory Price's personal assistant, Heather. Her expression was unreadable as she scanned the room, eyes lingering just a little too long on Elon. "Elon," she said, her voice too calm, too collected. "I've been looking for you." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Elon's mind raced. How much did she know? Had she been sent to trap him? "I was just on my way out," Elon said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "What can I help you with?" Heather's lips curled into a faint smile. "Actually, I'm here to make sure you don't leave." Her gaze shifted to the table where Jenna, Daniel, and Carla sat. "I think you've been busy, haven't you? Playing a dangerous game." Elon's gut clenched. This wasn't good. Heather wasn't just a messenger. She had been sent to deliver a warning. And it wasn't just for him anymore. Heather took a step closer. "You've underestimated Price. He's not someone you can just challenge and walk away from. But you know that, don't you?" She leaned in, her voice low and menacing. "You and your friends are out of your depth." Elon's mind was racing. He could hear the faint noise of footsteps approaching from outside. He had no time to lose. "I think it's time you and I had a little chat," he said, his voice ice cold. Without waiting for a response, he turned to the others. "Jenna, get the flash drive out now. We need to move." As the tension thickened in the cafe, Elon felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The game had just become a lot more dangerous. Elon's pulse raced as he turned to face Jenna, Daniel, and Carla. The air in the cafe seemed to freeze, thick with tension. He could hear Heather's slow footsteps behind him, but he didn't turn to face her. He couldn't afford to show any sign of weakness. His mind raced, every second counting. The flash drive needed to be in their hands before Price's people figured out they were too close to the truth. "Jenna, now," Elon repeated, his voice urgent. Jenna nodded, and in one swift motion, she reached into her bag and pulled out the small, unassuming flash drive. It was their lifeline, everything they had worked for. But as her fingers wrapped around it, Elon noticed something strange in her eyes. A flicker, a hesitation. Before he could say anything, Heather's voice broke the silence. "I see you've found it." Her tone was calm, almost too calm. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the flash drive in Jenna's hand. "Too bad you won't get to use it." The air shifted again, like a heavy weight pressing down on Elon's chest. There was something about Heather's demeanor that wasn't right. She wasn't just a messenger. She had a purpose here, a dangerous one. "Elon," Heather continued, her voice low and almost amused, "you think you're the only one playing this game? Price doesn't take kindly to people who think they can outsmart him. And I'm afraid you've just made your final move." Elon's heart sank as he realized what was happening. There was no way Heather had come here just to deliver a warning. She was here to stop them. He needed to act fast. But then, a voice from across the room startled him. It was Carla. "Wait, you don't understand." Carla's voice was shaking, and for a moment, Elon thought it was fear. But when he turned to look at her, he saw something far worse, guilt. Her eyes were lowered, avoiding his gaze, her hands trembling as she held onto the edge of the table. "What's going on, Carla?" Elon asked, his voice rising. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "Carla, what's happening?" Jenna, too, turned to look at her, her brow furrowed in confusion. Daniel's face mirrored their shock. It didn't take long for Elon to see the truth. The subtle shift in Carla's expression, the way she couldn't meet his eyes. It was all too clear now. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Carla whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening silence in the room. I couldn't risk everything." Elon took a step back, the words hanging in the air like a blade ready to fall. You, what do you mean? He could barely bring himself to ask. I didn't have a choice, Carla continued, her voice cracking. I've been working with Heather, with Price. The shock hit Elon like a wave crashing over him. He couldn't breathe for a moment. His mind raced, trying to process what Carla had just said. His own ally, his own friend, had been working with the enemy all along. How could he have missed it? Jenna and Daniel were staring at Carla, unable to process her betrayal. For a few long moments, no one spoke. The world outside the cafe seemed to disappear, as if time itself had stopped. Elon felt like he was in some kind of nightmare. I had no choice, Carla repeated, her voice desperate. Price, he promised me everything. I couldn't just walk away from it. You don't understand. She reached for the flash drive in Jenna's hand, but Jenna recoiled. Don't touch it. Jenna snapped, her voice sharp with anger. You can't just betray us and expect us to hand this over. Heather watched the exchange with amusement, her smile widening. You see, that's the thing about betrayal. It's never as simple as it seems. You think you know someone, and then they pull the rug out from under you. Elon's mind was spinning. He had to think fast. If he didn't do something soon, Price's people would come for them, and it would be game over. But how could he trust anyone now? Carla, the one person he had trusted the most, had just shattered that trust in an instant. What's going to happen now? Daniel finally spoke, his voice cold and filled with anger. You've made your choice, Carla, and so have we. Elon's gaze flicked back to Heather. She was standing there, waiting for him to make the next move. But there was no way he could let this slide. He had come too far, risked too much. There was no turning back now. Carla, you have two choices, Elon said, his voice icy. You can walk away from this now, help us finish what we started, and maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for redemption. Or, you can stand with Price and make yourself an enemy of everyone in this room. Carla's eyes flickered between Elon and Heather, her mind clearly torn. She knew that crossing Price was dangerous, but was she ready to face the consequences of her actions? For a long moment, Carla said nothing. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Finally, she looked at Elon, her voice barely a whisper. I can't go back, can I? Heather's smirk widened. No, Carla, you can't. But then, just as it seemed like the final pieces were falling into place, a loud crash sounded from the back of the cafe. Footsteps echoed, growing louder by the second. Someone was coming. Elon's heart skipped a beat. We need to move now. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the back of the cafe, followed by the unmistakable hum of a low engine outside. Elon's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't have much time. The storm was about to hit, and it would leave nothing but destruction in its wake. Jenna, take the flash drive and get to the car, Elon ordered, his voice sharp. Daniel, you're with me. We have to stall them. Carla's face paled, her eyes darting between Elon and Heather, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest like a vice. But there was no time for second-guessing. The seconds felt like minutes as the sound of approaching footsteps drew closer. Go, Elon repeated, his voice louder now. He didn't wait for a response. Jenna hesitated for only a second before grabbing the flash drive from the table and rushing toward the door, her face set with determination. Daniel followed closely behind her. Elon turned to face Heather, his fists clenched at his sides. The air around them crackled with tension, and the faint noise of a car engine revving just outside the cafe made his blood run cold. It was now or never. Heather stepped forward, her smile widening. You think you can get away with this, don't you? You're out of time, Elon. The clock's ticking. Price's people will be here any minute. Elon didn't flinch. I don't need to run, Heather. I'm not afraid of Price. He's the one who should be worried. There was a long pause, both of them locked in a silent standoff. Elon could feel the weight of Heather's gaze on him, her eyes calculating, trying to read his every move. But he wasn't about to let her get the upper hand. Not now. Give it up, Elon, Heather finally said, her voice almost pitying. You can't win this. You never could. Price will have you and your little group wiped out before the day's over. Elon didn't respond. His mind was already racing through his options, trying to outthink her, trying to get ahead of the game. He needed a plan, and fast. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway, blocking the exit. It was Carla. She was standing there, her back to the door, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" Elon asked, his heart sinking as he saw the look on her face. I can't do this anymore," Carla said, her voice shaky. She looked at Heather, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm not working for Price anymore. I'm done." For a moment, Elon stood frozen, unsure if he could trust her again. But in that moment, he saw something in Carla's eyes, something real, a flicker of hope. She was trying to make things right. Before Elon could say anything, the sound of more footsteps outside grew louder, and the door to the cafe burst open. Two men in dark suits stormed in, their eyes scanning the room with cold precision. Elon's stomach tightened as he recognized the unmistakable look of Price's enforcers. "This is it," Daniel said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "We need to move now." Elon glanced at Carla, then back to Heather. The tension in the room had reached its boiling point. The flash drive, Jenna, and Daniel were their only hope now. There was no turning back. "Carla," Elon said, his voice steady, "help us. Now, or they'll all be dead." Carla's eyes locked onto his, and for a second, it seemed like the world had stopped. Then, with a single nod, she stepped aside. "Let's finish this." Without a word, Elon bolted for the back door, but just as he reached it, Heather's voice rang out one final time. "You can't escape, Elon. You'll never be free of him," she shouted. But Elon didn't stop. He pushed through the door and into the alleyway, his heart hammering in his chest. The world outside seemed to close in around him, the sound of pursuit growing louder. His only focus now was the flash drive, and getting it to safety. As the chase began, every second felt like an eternity. Elon and the others darted through the back streets, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Jenna was up ahead, clutching the flash drive tightly in her hand, determined not to let it fall into the wrong hands. Behind them, the sound of footsteps was relentless. Price's men were closing in, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Elon's mind raced. There had to be another way out, another escape, but where? The alley seemed endless, and there was no sign of help. Then, from behind them, a loud screeching noise filled the air. Elon turned just in time to see a black SUV skid around the corner, its tires screeching against the pavement as it sped toward them. "Get in," Daniel shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. He was already halfway to the car, his hand gripping the door handle. Elon didn't hesitate. He ran towards the vehicle, adrenaline surging through him. Jenna was already inside, her eyes wide with fear but determination. "Drive," Elon shouted as soon as he was in the back seat, the door slamming shut behind him. The SUV roared to life, the tires screeching as they sped off down the narrow street. Elon looked back at the alley, his heart racing. He didn't know if they were safe yet, but for the first time in hours, he allowed himself a breath of relief. The countdown had begun, but for the first time, it felt like they might actually have a chance. The roar of the engine filled the air as the SUV raced down the darkened streets. Elon's eyes flickered from the rearview mirror to the window, scanning every shadow for signs of pursuit. Jenna was sitting in the front seat, clutching the flash drive tightly against her chest. The silence in the car was thick, each of them processing the gravity of what had just transpired. "How long do you think we have?" Daniel's voice broke the silence, his hands gripping the dashboard as they swerved around a corner. Elon leaned forward, his gaze never leaving the rearview mirror. The flashing lights in the distance were a reminder that their time was running out. "Not long. We need to get off the grid fast." He turned his attention to Jenna, whose face was pale but focused. "How's the drive? Did you get everything?" Jenna nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she held the small flash drive. "It's all here. Every piece of information we need to bring down Price. But it won't matter if we don't get it to the right people." Elon's mind raced. He knew that the data they had could change everything, destroy Price's empire. but it was also the most dangerous thing they could possess. Price would stop at nothing to get it back, and with his resources, it was only a matter of time before they were tracked down. Suddenly, the headlights of another vehicle appeared in the distance, closing in fast. Elon's heart skipped a beat. "Brace yourself," he muttered. The SUV swerved to avoid an oncoming car, the tires screeching in protest as the vehicle tore through the streets. Elon could feel the pressure building inside him. Every decision, every move was life or death now. "Take the next exit," Elon ordered, his voice sharp. "We need to disappear." Daniel nodded and veered off the main road, taking the car into a narrow, winding side street. The SUV's tires bounced over potholes, the suspension straining under the rough terrain. For a moment, it felt like they were driving through a labyrinth, the city lights fading as the darkness of the back streets swallowed them whole. "I don't think we've lost them yet," Jenna said, glancing over her shoulder nervously. "We won't lose them unless we take drastic measures," Elon replied, his jaw tight. "We need to split up." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Split up? Are you crazy? If they catch one of us—" "Listen to me," Elon cut him off. "The more we stick together, the more likely we'll get caught. If we split up, they won't know which one of us has the flash drive. It's our best shot at getting away." The tension in the car was palpable. Jenna looked at Elon, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Are you sure this is the right move?" Elon nodded. "It's our only shot." The SUV slowed as they approached an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was dark, its windows shattered and covered in grime. It was the perfect place to lay low, at least for a few hours. "All right, here's the plan," Elon said, his voice steady as he laid out the strategy. "Jenna, you stay with Daniel. I'll go alone." "What? No way," Daniel protested. "You're not doing this alone, Elon." "I am," Elon said firmly, turning to meet Daniel's eyes. "I can't risk us all getting caught. You two need to get to the drop-off point. I'll take care of the rest." Jenna took a deep breath and nodded, though the unease was clear in her eyes. "Be careful, Elon. We can't afford to lose anyone else." "I know," he said, his gaze hardening. "I'll be fine. You just make sure that drive gets to the right hands." As the SUV stopped in front of the warehouse, Elon climbed out, taking a moment to scan the surroundings. The air was cold and still, the only sound the soft hum of the city in the distance. He needed to be fast, and he needed to be smart. There was no room for mistakes. The others watched as Elon disappeared into the darkness. Daniel's hand tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "You trust him?" he asked, his voice low. Jenna didn't respond immediately. She was watching the shadows where Elon had disappeared, a part of her reluctant to let him go. But she knew that there was no other choice. "Yeah, I trust him," she said finally, "but I'm scared. I don't know if we can win this." Daniel sighed, glancing at her. "We don't have much of a choice now. We just have to keep moving forward." As Elon moved through the deserted streets, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but he couldn't afford to waste time. He had to trust his instincts. He approached a quiet alleyway, the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. He ducked into the shadows, pulling his coat tighter around him as he waited. The tension was unbearable, each second feeling like an eternity. He knew that the danger was close. The figure that appeared before him wasn't what he had expected. "You should have stayed with them," Heather's voice came from the darkness, cold and unforgiving. Elon's heart skipped a beat. "What do you want, Heather?" he demanded, trying to steady his breathing. Her smile was cruel. "I'm here to make sure you don't make it out of this alive." And just like that, the trap was set. The cold night air wrapped around Elon like a vice as he stared at Heather, her silhouette just a few feet away. The dim streetlights cast eerie shadows across her face, but it was her cold smile that sent a chill down his spine. "I don't understand," Elon said, his voice tight with confusion and anger. "You're working for Price, aren't you? Why the betrayal?" Heather's smile widened, though her eyes remained hard and calculating. "It's not about loyalty, Elon. It's about survival. You and I both know how the game works. Price offers me something I can't refuse. You're nothing but a pawn in this, just like everyone else." Elon's blood boiled at her words. He had always known Heather was ruthless, but to hear it so plainly, like she had no conscience, stung. He took a step back, mentally preparing for whatever came next. So, what now? You're going to kill me and walk away? Heather laughed softly, the sound almost mocking. No, not kill. Not yet. I still need you alive. But you won't get away from Price. We'll find you, no matter where you run. A flicker of doubt crossed Elon's mind. If Heather was in cahoots with Price, how had she found him so easily? Could there have been a mole among them all along? I won't let you win, Elon said through gritted teeth. I still have the flash drive. You won't get it. Heather stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You think I need the flash drive, Elon? That's not what I'm after. I'm after you. Elon's instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt frozen to the ground. He had to think fast. You're not getting away with this, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Suddenly, a sound broke the tension. A screech of tires, a distant car horn, and then another vehicle appearing at the end of the alley. The headlights were blinding, but Elon couldn't afford to lose his focus. This was his chance to make a move. Elon, look out! Jenna's voice called from the distance, her silhouette appearing behind Heather just as Heather turned to face her. Before Elon could react, Heather lunged, but not toward him. Instead, she grabbed the small device from Elon's hand. The flash drive. No! Elon shouted, but it was too late. Heather had it in her grasp. She took a step back, and in a flash, the two men who had been tailing them stepped out of the shadows, brandishing weapons. You're too late, Heather said coldly, holding the drive up to show them both. The game is over. Elon's mind raced as he assessed the situation. He had only one chance. He had to take it. In a swift motion, he dove toward Heather, knocking the drive from her hand. It flew through the air, landing in the dirt at Jenna's feet. Grab it! Elon yelled, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he fought to stay on his feet. Jenna didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, grabbing the drive just as the two men advanced on her. Elon didn't have time to explain. Run. Get to the drop-off now, he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. But Heather wasn't done yet. She drew a gun from her jacket and aimed it at Jenna. No one moves, she snarled. Time seemed to slow. Elon's heart raced, and his mind whirled with possible outcomes. He couldn't let Heather take the drive. He couldn't let them win. Stop, Elon commanded, his voice sharp as he lunged toward Heather, knocking the gun from her hand just as she pulled the trigger. The shot fired into the air, ricocheting off the alley walls. The sudden commotion caused the two men to hesitate, just long enough for Elon to grab Heather by the arm and throw her to the ground. Go. Now, he shouted at Jenna. Jenna hesitated only for a second before turning on her heel and running, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. As she disappeared into the night, Elon took a deep breath and turned back to face Heather, who was now struggling to regain her footing. You should have stayed out of this, Heather, Elon said, his voice cold and resolute. You could have walked away. But now, you're going to regret this. Heather glared at him, a mix of fury and disbelief in her eyes. You think you've won? You can't stop what's coming, Elon. It's too late. Elon raised an eyebrow. Don't be so sure. This is just the beginning. With that, he turned and sprinted down the alley, following the direction that Jenna had gone. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no time to lose. The clock was ticking, and he couldn't afford to let Price get his hands on the drive. Elon's breath came in sharp bursts as he sprinted through the darkened streets, his mind racing faster than his legs. He could hear the distant sound of footsteps behind him. Heather's goons weren't far behind. He needed to stay ahead, to get to Jenna and the flash drive before it was too late. As he turned the corner, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it, but something told him he needed to check. Pulling the device from his jacket, he saw a text message from Jenna. I'm headed to the safe house. You need to get here fast. His heart skipped a beat. The safe house. It was the only place they could regroup and plan their next move. But it wasn't close. The danger was real. Heather wasn't going to stop until she had the drive. Elon knew he had to act fast, or everything would be lost. He typed a quick reply, Stay hidden. I'll be there soon." Just as he put the phone away, he heard the familiar roar of engines. More cars, closing in on him from both directions. He cursed under his breath. He had to make it to the safe house, but the streets were no longer a safe place. Elon ducked into an alley, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. His pulse pounded in his ears as he scanned the area, looking for a way out. His eyes landed on a fire escape above him. Without a second thought, he grabbed the nearest trash can, climbed onto it, and used it as leverage to pull himself up to the first rung of the fire escape. The rusted metal creaked under his weight, but it held firm. He climbed quickly, adrenaline pushing him upwards. From the rooftop, he could see the cars pull up on the street below, their headlights illuminating the area. The goons were getting closer, and Elon had no time to waste. He crouched low, moving swiftly across the rooftops, each step calculated and precise. He needed to stay ahead of them. He couldn't afford to be caught, not now. After a few minutes, he reached a narrow street where the buildings were more spaced out. Elon paused, listening. He could hear the sound of tires screeching in the distance. The goons had spotted him. They were on his tail, but he was faster. He took a deep breath and vaulted off the edge of the building, landing on a dumpster below with a soft thud. His knees buckled slightly from the impact, but he didn't have time to waste. He got up and ran. As he approached the safe house, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Jenna. "I hear them. They're closing in. You need to hurry." Elon's heart raced. He pushed his legs harder, willing his body to keep up with the desperation coursing through him. He rounded the final corner and spotted the door to the safe house just ahead. It was almost within reach. But then, a voice behind him. "Not so fast." Elon spun around just in time to see Heather and her goons stepping out of the shadows, blocking his escape. He was surrounded. "Give it up, Musk," Heather said coldly, her voice dripping with disdain. "You've done enough running. This ends now." Elon's mind raced as he sized up the situation. Heather was too close, and the goons were ready to make their move. He could fight, but it wouldn't end well. He needed to outsmart them, again. He glanced to his left and saw an old delivery van parked by the curb. A plan started to form in his mind. He had only one chance to pull it off. Without a word, Elon turned and sprinted toward the van. He heard Heather shout after him, but he didn't slow down. He reached the van and grabbed the door handle, yanking it open just as Heather's goons started to move. They were too late. Inside the van, there was a large stack of boxes. Elon quickly shoved the boxes aside, found a spare set of keys hanging from the dashboard, and started the engine. The van roared to life, its engine echoing in the silent night. He slammed the gearshift into drive and hit the gas. The van shot forward, crashing through the barricade Heather's goons had set up. He could hear the tires screeching as the van sped down the street, leaving the men behind. As Elon drove, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He had outsmarted them, again, but he knew this wasn't over. They would keep coming. Price wouldn't rest until he had the drive, and Heather was relentless. He pressed the gas pedal harder, his eyes focused on the road ahead. The safe house was close, but danger was always just a step behind. The van bounced along the uneven road, its tires squealing as Elon pushed the accelerator harder, trying to outrun the danger that loomed just behind him. His mind raced, the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he neared the safe house. He had to keep moving, keep thinking ahead, because Heather and her men wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. The streets grew quieter as he approached the industrial district, a part of the city that rarely saw daylight. It was the perfect place to hide out, isolated, hard to find. He could only hope that Jenna had already made it there. As he pulled up to the dilapidated warehouse, the familiar sight of the locked gate greeted him. He quickly parked the van, grabbed his phone, and texted Jenna, "I'm here. Get ready to move." No response came immediately, and a sense of unease crept over him. He looked around, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The place was eerily silent. Elon stepped out of the van, his instincts on high alert. Every sound felt amplified in the stillness, his shoes scraping against the gravel, the rustling of the wind through the nearby trees. There was something off about the whole situation. He moved toward the entrance of the warehouse, trying to keep a low profile. As he neared the door, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something wasn't right. The usual locked door, the keypad, everything was as it should be, but there was no sign of Jenna. "Jenna," he called out softly, his voice echoing through the empty space. No answer. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach as he stepped inside, the creaky hinges of the door groaning in protest. He reached for his flashlight, scanning the dark, cavernous room. The only sounds were the faint hum of distant traffic and his own heartbeat. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "Looking for someone?" Elon froze, his flashlight flickering as it fell on a figure standing in the shadows. It was Jenna, but there was something off about her. Her posture was tense, her expression hard. "Jenna?" Elon asked, his voice shaky. "What's going on? Where's the drive?" She took a step forward, her face illuminated by the faint light from his flashlight. There was no warmth in her eyes, no sign of the trust they had shared. Instead, there was something colder, something calculating. "I'm afraid the drive's not here anymore," she said, her voice void of emotion. "You've been played, Elon." Elon's blood ran cold as realization hit him like a ton of bricks. "What? No. You." But before he could finish his sentence, Jenna raised her hand, revealing a small black device. The flash drive. It was in her possession now. "What is this?" Elon demanded, his voice rising in shock. You were working with them all along?" Jenna nodded slowly, a smirk curling at the corners of her lips. "I had no choice. You think you can just walk into this game, Elon? It's not that simple. Price always wins. And now, so do I." Elon's mind raced as he processed her betrayal. The Jenna he knew, the loyal, kind-hearted woman who had risked so much to help him, was gone. In her place stood someone cold and unrecognizable. "I trusted you," Elon said, his voice thick with disbelief. "I thought we were in this together." Jenna's expression softened for a moment, but only briefly. "You never understood the game, did you? You were just a pawn, Elon. I needed that drive. I needed you to get it for me. And now, I've got what I came for." A knot formed in Elon's stomach as he realized the extent of his miscalculations. He had been so focused on outsmarting Heather, on keeping the drive safe, that he had never suspected Jenna might be the one to betray him. "Why?" Elon demanded. "What do you get out of this?" Jenna's eyes narrowed. "I get freedom, power, security. With Price backing me, I'll never have to struggle again. You have no idea what it's like to be in my position." Elon's jaw clenched as anger flared inside him. "You sold your soul for this?" She didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel, walking toward the back of the warehouse. "It's over, Elon. The drive is gone. There's nothing you can do now." "Don't be so sure," Elon muttered under his breath. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He had underestimated Jenna, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. As Jenna turned her back to him, Elon's mind spun with possible plans. The betrayal hurt, yes, but he wasn't beaten. He would find another way. He always did. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. The distant wail of police cars signaled trouble, but Elon didn't wait to find out who was arriving. He had to act fast. "Jenna," Elon called. "You're not going to get away with this. You think Price is going to protect you forever?" She paused, but didn't turn around. "It doesn't matter anymore. You'll be the one in trouble soon enough." Elon's fingers clenched into fists. He had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. He needed to act quickly before the situation spiraled completely out of control. Elon has been betrayed by someone he trusted. How would you handle this shocking twist? Do you think Jenna will face consequences for her actions, or will she escape unscathed? Share your thoughts below. The sirens grew louder, closing in fast. Elon stood frozen for a moment, weighing his options. Jenna, now walking away with the flash drive, was a threat, but the police arriving could complicate everything. His mind raced as he glanced at the exit, a narrow side door that led to an alleyway. It was his best shot at avoiding capture. "Jenna!" Elon shouted again, his voice firm. "You don't know what you're doing. Price doesn't care about you. He'll throw you away when you're no longer useful." She didn't flinch. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as if she had already won. Elon's heart pounded, the urgency to stop her growing with each passing second. "You think I'm the one in danger?" Jenna said, her voice dripping with scorn. "You're the one who's been played from the start, Elon. I'm already ahead. The game's over for you." The words stung, but they didn't break him. He couldn't let her walk out of here with the drive. Not now when everything was so close to falling apart. If he didn't act fast, the world would be at the mercy of Heather and Price, and nothing would stop them from unleashing chaos. Elon moved quickly, not bothering with the front door. He darted to the side, using his knowledge of the safe house to find the back exit. His fingers brushed against the cold steel of the door's handle just as the sound of the police cars drew nearer. His pulse quickened. He had no time to waste. With one swift motion, Elon flung the door open and slipped into the alleyway. The night air was cold, but it was the freedom he needed. His feet pounded against the pavement as he raced down the alley, heart racing with a mixture of anger, betrayal, and desperation. He couldn't afford to be caught, not when Jenna had the drive and was about to deliver it to Price. But as he turned a corner, he stopped dead in his tracks. He wasn't alone. Standing at the end of the alley, blocking his way, were three of Price's men, big, burly figures, their hands resting on the handles of their weapons. The glow of the streetlights illuminated their cold expressions. They had been waiting for him. Elon's breath caught in his throat. They had anticipated his move. He should have known. "Going somewhere, Musk?" One of the men growled, stepping forward. The others followed suit, their eyes narrowing. Elon's mind raced as he sized them up. There was no way he could outrun them, not in the state he was in. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. But there was one thing he had, his wits. Without warning, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small device. He'd had it on him for months, a piece of tech he'd been working on, a jammer, one that could disrupt communication signals for miles. It wasn't perfect, but it was all he had. The men stopped in their tracks, eyes narrowing suspiciously as Elon pressed the button. The air seemed to hum with static for a moment, before the sound of their radios crackling with interference filled the alley. "What the hell?" one of the men shouted, turning to his partners. Elon didn't wait. He lunged forward, his body moving on instinct, and grabbed the nearest man by the collar. With a swift twist, he sent him crashing into the others, knocking them off balance. The man's radio fell to the ground with a loud clatter, and in that moment of confusion, Elon darted past them, sprinting down the alley with renewed urgency. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He reached the end of the alley and bolted across the street, narrowly avoiding the headlights of a passing car. He needed to get back to Jenna. He couldn't let her leave with the drive, couldn't let Price's men have their way. But just as he turned onto the next street, a voice called out from behind him. "You're not getting away, Musk." Elon's heart sank. He didn't look back. The moment he did, he knew they'd have him. Instead, he kept running, pushing his body harder than he ever had before. His legs burned, his chest felt tight, but he couldn't stop now, not when everything was on the line. As he rounded another corner, he saw her, Jenna, walking briskly toward a parked car. The flash drive was clutched in her hand. "Elon," she called out, her voice mocking. "You're too late." He didn't respond. He was already moving, closing the distance between them in a matter of seconds. As she reached for the car door, Elon grabbed her arm, spinning her around. "Give me the drive," he said through gritted teeth. Jenna's eyes flashed with annoyance, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, a smile that sent a chill down his spine. "You still don't get it, do you? You can't stop this." She raised the drive higher in the air, taunting him. "This is bigger than you, Elon. It's over." But Elon wasn't done. He wasn't giving up, not yet. With one final move, he reached for her wrist, twisting it until the drive fell into his hand. He held it, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Elon looked into Jenna's eyes, the woman he had trusted, the woman who had betrayed him. "It's not over," he said, his voice calm but determined. "Not by a long shot." Elon's hands shook as he held the flash drive in his palm, its weight now a symbol of the turmoil he'd been thrust into. He stared at it for a moment, breathing in the cold night air, his mind racing. Jenna's words echoed in his ears, but he pushed them aside. The game wasn't over. Not yet. Jenna stood motionless, her eyes narrowing in frustration. She had underestimated him, again. Her pride, her belief that she was the one in control, had led to this moment. But she wasn't about to go down quietly. She had one last card to play. "You're making a mistake, Elon," she spat, her voice sharp with venom. "You don't even know what's at stake here." Elon's eyes met hers, but there was no fear in his gaze. He had heard it all before. The threats, the promises of power, the manipulation. It had all led him here, to this very point. The truth was clear to him now. The flash drive held the key to everything. His future, the fate of the people he cared about, and the world at large. "I know exactly what's at stake," Elon replied, his voice steady. "And it's time to end this, once and for all." Jenna took a step forward, her hand moving toward her jacket pocket. Elon tensed, his instincts on high alert. Was she reaching for a weapon? Or was she trying to make one last desperate attempt to escape? Before he could react, she withdrew a small, sleek device. Another gadget, just like the one she had used earlier. But this one was different. It had a red button, and Elon recognized it immediately. It was a remote trigger, likely connected to a series of bombs scattered throughout the hospital. If she pressed it, the entire building could go up in flames. "No," Elon shouted, taking a step toward her. "You don't have to do this, Jenna." Her lips twisted into a cruel smile as she held the device out in front of her, the button within easy reach. "You've made your choice, Elon. Now, I'm making mine." For a brief moment, Elon's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. Was he too late? Could he stop her before she triggered the destruction? He had no choice but to act. Without thinking, he lunged at her, grabbing her wrist just as she was about to press the button. The struggle was brief, but intense. Jenna was stronger than he expected, and for a moment, it seemed as though she might overpower him. But Elon wasn't about to let it end like this. With one final surge of strength, he twisted her arm, forcing her to drop the device. It clattered to the ground, and with a quick motion, he kicked it out of her reach. Jenna let out a frustrated cry, her face contorting with rage. She lunged at him, but Elon was ready. With one swift movement, he grabbed her by the shoulders and held her back, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "This is over," he said, his voice low and firm. "You've lost." Jenna's eyes flared with fury, but the fight drained from her. She slumped in his grasp, her resistance fading. For a moment, there was silence, the two of them locked in a tense standoff. But then, from the shadows behind them, a voice broke through. Well, this is quite the turn of events, isn't it?" Elon's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. It was Price. Turning slowly, he saw Price step into the alley, flanked by two of his men. The gleam of a gun in Price's hand caught the light of the street lamp above. "You think you've won?" Price sneered, his eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "You're a fool, Musk. You always were." Elon's hand tightened around the flash drive, his mind working quickly. Price had to be stopped, but how? With the police closing in on the hospital, time was running out. He had no backup, no way of communicating with the authorities. It was just him, Jenna, and Price. "Price," Elon said, his voice steady, "it's over. You're not getting the drive. You're not getting anything." Price chuckled, the sound dark and hollow. "You really think you're in control, don't you? You've been a pawn in this game from the very beginning. I've been 2 steps ahead of you the whole time." Elon's stomach twisted. He had known Price was dangerous, but hearing him admit it was another level of betrayal. Elon had been used, manipulated, and lied to every step of the way. He had trusted the wrong people, and now he was paying the price. "You're a dead man, Musk," Price said, raising the gun. "And there's nothing you can do to stop me." Elon didn't flinch. Instead, he stood tall, staring Price down with unwavering confidence. "You've underestimated me before, and you're doing it again. I'm not going to let you destroy everything." In that moment, a realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He couldn't stop Price with brute force or tech, but there was one thing he could do. He could expose him. He could take the fight to the media, to the people who would make sure Price paid for his crimes. Jenna, Elon said, turning to her, you're still in this. We can stop him together. Jenna's expression softened for just a moment, as if she were considering the possibility of redemption. But before she could answer, Price moved quickly, his gun trained on Elon. It's too late for you, Price sneered. You're done. With a flash of movement, Elon dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the bullet that shot through the air. He could feel the heat of it as it grazed past him, but he wasn't going to let fear stop him now. The bullet had narrowly missed Elon, but the fear it instilled in him was very real. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. Jenna was frozen, her eyes locked on the weapon in Price's hand. Elon knew he had mere seconds before the situation escalated further. Price was grinning, his cold eyes watching Elon like a predator eyeing its prey. You've got guts, Musk, he taunted, taking a slow step forward. But guts won't save you. Nothing will. Elon's heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow. He had no time for mistakes now. He couldn't outfight Price. He was too well-armed and too dangerous. But there was one thing Elon was sure of. He couldn't let Price get away. Not after everything that had happened. Jenna, Elon said, his voice low but urgent. We have to work together. We have to get out of here now. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jenna looked hesitant. Her eyes darted between Elon and Price, her mind clearly wrestling with the decision. But something in Elon's words must have resonated because, with a sharp intake of breath, she moved closer to him. You're right, she said, her voice trembling. But how? He's got us cornered. Elon didn't hesitate. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the nearest exit. I'll create a diversion. You get to the police. Tell them everything. Before she could respond, he turned his focus back to Price. He had only one shot at this. You really think you've won? Elon called out, trying to buy time. You're not the only one with resources. You don't have the power you think you do. Price scoffed. You're delusional. You can't stop me now. The drive, the bombs, everything. It's already in motion. You're too late. A chill ran down Elon's spine. The bombs. He had almost forgotten about them in the heat of the confrontation. If Price had rigged the entire hospital with explosives, then everyone, was at risk. We're not too late, Elon said, his voice firm. I know exactly what you've done, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it. Price's face twisted into a scowl. You're out of your depth. You're just a billionaire with toys. You have no idea what's really going on here. And then, something unexpected happened. Elon's hand went into his jacket pocket, and he pulled out the small device he had stolen earlier from Price's hideout, the one that could disable the bomb system. He'd kept it as insurance, not knowing how or when he would need it. But now, standing in the middle of this high-stakes game, it was his only hope. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the device. Price's eyes went wide with realization. No, you. Before he could finish his sentence, there was a low, echoing hum that filled the air. The hospital's emergency lights flickered, and the countdown to disaster abruptly stopped. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance, suspended in the eerie quiet that followed the brief, intense noise. What have you done? Price snarled, his calm facade cracking. I've taken away your leverage, Elon said, his voice barely a whisper. You've lost. Jenna, who had been standing a few feet away, seized the opportunity. Now, Price, we'll make sure you never hurt anyone again, she said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. Price, realizing the jig was up, made a split-second decision. He turned and sprinted toward the exit, his men following closely behind. Elon knew the chase was far from over, but at least for now, Price was on the run. Don't let him escape, Elon shouted, but the hospital was a maze of corridors, and by the time he reached the exit, Price was nowhere to be seen. His last chance to catch him was slipping away. But then, Elon's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, seeing a number he didn't recognize. Without thinking, he answered. Elon Musk. The voice on the other end said, distorted by static. You think you've won? This is far from over. It was Price, and he was already planning his next move. Where are you? Elon demanded, his patience wearing thin. You're done. It's over. Price chuckled darkly. It's never over, Musk. I've made sure of that. If you want to stop me, you'll have to face me head-on. And this time, there's no way out for you. The line went dead, leaving Elon standing in the cold hallway, his heart racing once again. Elon's mind raced. He knew that Price was dangerous, but what he didn't expect was how relentless he would be. The hospital was still in chaos after the near detonation, and while the immediate threat was contained, the enemy was far from defeated. Elon had to make a decision. Chase down Price immediately or first secure the hospital and ensure no other bombs had been planted. His heart was heavy with the weight of the decision. As much as he wanted to confront Price directly, the hospital was still at risk. People were still running for cover, and lives were at stake. Elon's instincts screamed that he needed to prioritize safety. Jenna, Elon called out, grabbing her arm as she stood near the exit. I need you to help me ensure that everyone is safe. I'll track down Price. Jenna's eyes widened with determination, but she nodded. What should I do first? Get the emergency responders. Let them know what happened and make sure they check every corner of this building. I'll handle Price, Elon said, his voice steely. Jenna hesitated, her gaze flickering to the hallway where Price had vanished moments before. Be careful, Elon. We don't know what he's capable of. Elon gave her a quick nod before sprinting down the corridor. His shoes slapped against the cold, sterile floor as his mind flashed through possible strategies. Price had likely anticipated that Elon would try to stop him from escaping, and he was probably well prepared for a confrontation. As Elon reached the service stairwell, he found something unexpected. The door to the stairwell was wide open, and the faint sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the floor above. Price was close. With his heart pounding, Elon ascended the stairs, using his knowledge of the building's layout to his advantage. He was well-versed in navigating the hospital's maze of hallways and staircases, having explored every inch during his many visits. The stairs creaked under his weight, but he moved as quickly as he could, each step bringing him closer to the confrontation he knew was inevitable. Finally, Elon reached the roof. He paused, his breathing heavy, scanning the area. The wind was sharp and cold, making it feel even more desolate up there. And then he saw him, Price, standing near the edge of the building, facing the city below. He was alone. I knew you'd come for me, Price said, his voice calm despite the chaos that had surrounded him moments before. But it's too late. You've already lost. Elon didn't respond at first. He took a moment to assess the situation. Price had backed himself into a corner, but that didn't mean he was out of tricks. His entire demeanor suggested he had a plan, something waiting in the wings. I'm done playing games, Price, Elon said, his voice steady. This ends tonight. Price turned slowly, his eyes flashing with amusement. You think you're in control? You think you can stop me? I'm the one who's been controlling this whole game. You're just a player who doesn't know the rules. Elon's anger simmered, but he held it in check. He needed to keep his focus. One wrong move, and everything could spiral out of control. You don't have control over anything anymore. The bombs are disarmed. The police are on their way. It's over. For a moment, Price's expression faltered. But then his smile returned, this time with a hint of something darker. You don't understand, Musk. There's more at stake here than just bombs and police. I've got plans in motion you can't even fathom. You've won a battle, but the war? That's still coming. Before Elon could respond, a loud click echoed through the night air. Price had pulled out another device, a small remote control, and pressed a button. Elon's stomach dropped as he realized what was happening. The building trembled beneath their feet. Price, what the hell did you just do? Elon shouted, his voice rising in panic. Price chuckled, a wicked glint in his eyes. You think the bombs were my only contingency? This building is set to implode from the inside. Even if you stop me, nothing will survive. Elon's mind spun, but he acted quickly. He had to think on his feet. You can't be serious. You're willing to die with everyone else? I already told you, Price said, his voice low and almost triumphant. "You're too late. There's nothing you can do now." In that moment, Elon's mind flashed back to everything he had learned about Price, the twisted games he played, and the risks he was willing to take. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this monster win. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device, the one that could hack into and disable any remotely activated systems. Price hadn't realized Elon had taken it earlier. The device in his hand was Elon's last chance. "You're not the only one who knows how to play games," Elon said, his voice sharp with determination. "You made one mistake, Price. You underestimated me." Price lunged toward him, but Elon was faster. He pressed the button on the device, and in an instant, the tremors stopped. The hum of the building's internal mechanisms died down. The countdown to disaster halted. Price's face drained of color. What did you do?" "I just ended your game," Elon said coldly, stepping forward. "And I'm not done yet." Price's face twisted with disbelief as the last shred of his plan unraveled before him. The smugness that had once radiated from him vanished, replaced by raw anger and desperation. Elon stood firm, holding the device that had just saved countless lives. He knew, however, that Price wasn't one to give up easily. This final confrontation was about to take a darker turn. Elon's thoughts raced as he assessed the situation. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Price had underestimated him, but now he was cornered, dangerous, unpredictable, and driven by a need for revenge. Elon had to decide what to do next. Price, seething with fury, took a step back toward the edge of the building, his eyes wild. "You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. This is far from over." Elon stepped forward, keeping a safe distance. "You're right, Price. This isn't over for you. You'll be behind bars for the rest of your life." But Price wasn't listening. He pulled out another device, a smaller, more subtle one. Elon's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a final play. This was something far worse. Price's finger hovered over a button, and for a split second, Elon wondered if this was the moment everything truly ended. The air around them felt charged, heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. Elon could see the madness in Price's eyes. This man wasn't interested in escaping or negotiating. He wanted total destruction. "You really think the authorities are going to catch me?" Price spat. "You don't understand. I've planned for every scenario. You'll never stop me." Elon didn't take his eyes off the device in Price's hand. "It's over, Price. Whatever you're holding, it's not going to work. You've lost." Price's lip curled into a sneer, and in a desperate move, he hurled the device in Elon's direction. It clattered to the ground, rolling away from them both, but there was no explosion, no fiery aftermath. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. The device had been a diversion. Price was using his last breath to make a move that would push Elon to his limits, but the endgame was near. Elon took a deep breath and advanced on Price slowly. "You've failed," Elon said softly, but his voice was like steel. "You've pushed too far, and now it's time to face the consequences." Price stood there for a moment, glaring at Elon, his hands trembling. "You think you've won? You think your technology and your money will save you?" His voice cracked with venom. "You're nothing but a pawn. You'll always be a pawn in a system that's too broken to fix." Elon could feel his pulse quicken. Price was a broken man, clinging to a twisted ideology, but Elon knew he couldn't afford to let his anger get the best of him. This wasn't just about stopping Price. It was about ensuring that no one else would ever be put in the same position again. With his last ounce of strength, Price lunged at Elon, but this time, Elon was ready. He sidestepped swiftly, catching Price's arm and twisting it behind his back. The momentum of the move sent Price crashing to the ground. Elon stood over him, breathing heavily. "This is over, Price. You're going to face justice for everything you've done." Price, face down on the cold rooftop, let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is justice? You think locking me up will fix the world?" His voice was hoarse, almost pleading, but there was a hint of a challenge in it. Elon paused, staring down at him. "No, Price, but it's the only thing that can stop you. It's the only way to make sure you don't hurt anyone else ever again." Just then, The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. The police had arrived, but it was clear that they were only part of the solution. Elon couldn't leave it to them alone. He knew he had to make sure Price was fully under control before anyone else could intervene. Jenna, Elon muttered to himself, recalling the woman who had stayed by his side throughout this ordeal. She had worked tirelessly to make sure the hospital was safe. It was time to finish this. He glanced back at Price one last time. This is it. You're done. Price's lips curled into one final sneer as the police officers stormed the roof. The tension between them was palpable, but Elon knew the moment was his. As the officers moved in to arrest Price, Elon felt a sense of finality wash over him. The hospital was safe. The threat was neutralized. Price would never hurt anyone again. As the police hauled Price away, Elon took a deep breath, finally feeling the weight of everything lift. He turned to face the city below. He had won, but at what cost? The destruction had been close, too close. And yet, in the end, he knew that the world had been spared a greater tragedy. The city skyline gleamed in the distance as Elon Musk sat in the quiet of his office, staring out the window. The events of the past weeks had unfolded in ways he never could have anticipated. The danger had passed, but the emotional toll remained. In the wake of Price's capture, a new sense of purpose began to take root inside him. For once, Elon felt a rare sense of relief. He had done it. He had stopped Price. But there was more to it than that. The path ahead was clearer now, not because everything had been fixed, but because he had learned something valuable. This victory, while monumental, wasn't just about defeating a villain. It was about redefining what mattered, what he stood for, and how far he was willing to go to make a difference. He leaned back in his chair, lost in thought, when a soft knock echoed through the room. It was Jenna. She entered, her face warm but weary from the constant strain of the past few days. The weight of their shared journey hung between them, but there was something different now, a sense of shared understanding. "How are you holding up?" Jenna asked softly, her voice a calming contrast to the storm that had just passed. Elon exhaled slowly. "Better. It's all over now, I think, but I can't shake the feeling that it's only the beginning." Jenna nodded, understanding without needing any further explanation. They both knew that the world, as chaotic as it seemed, was never truly at rest. There would always be new challenges, new threats, and new problems to solve. But it was moments like this, in the quiet aftermath, that reminded them of why they did it in the first place. Not for glory, not for fame, but for the greater good. The two of them sat together in silence, reflecting on the journey they had just completed. It wasn't just about saving the hospital or stopping Price. It was about something deeper, about realizing the power of human connection, the value of hope, and the strength of perseverance. In the end, that was what had carried them through. Elon stood up, walking over to the window and gazing out at the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the buildings below. "You know," he began thoughtfully, "it's easy to get caught up in the race, to think that solving problems with technology or money is the answer to everything. But sometimes, the answer lies in what we do for each other." Jenna smiled, her eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You've learned that lesson the hard way, but I think it's a good one." He turned to her, a glint of determination in his eyes. "I don't think it's over yet. The world still needs a lot of help, and I can't do it alone." Jenna's smile grew. "I think we're in this together, whether we like it or not." Elon chuckled softly. "Yeah, I guess so." Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from the authorities. They had finished their investigation, and it seemed that Price wasn't the only one who had been involved in the plot. There were still more threads to unravel, more players hidden in the shadows. But this time, Elon wasn't going in blind. He had learned valuable lessons through his encounter with Price. "We have more work to do," Elon said, a fire igniting within him once again. "But we'll do it the right way this time." Jenna gave him a supportive nod, one step at a time. As the evening wore on, Elon found himself reflecting on everything he had learned over the course of the past weeks. His drive to change the world, his ambition to push boundaries, those had always been a part of him. But now, He understood that true power came not from technology or wealth, but from connection, empathy, and the strength to make a difference. The fight against price had been a wake-up call, not just for Elon, but for the entire world. It was easy to get caught up in the spectacle of technology, in the excitement of innovation. But the real progress, the real revolution, came from understanding the human heart, the intricacies of human relationships, and the deeper needs of society. Elon looked at Jenna, his partner in this journey, and realized that together they could face whatever came next. They had survived the darkest of times, and now they were ready to help the world rebuild, one step at a time. Elon has learned valuable lessons from his journey with Price. But what about you? What do you think is the most important lesson Elon learned during this adventure? How would you approach the next challenge if you were in his shoes? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below.